Welcome into the Inside Bassmaster Podcast, episode 138, and then we're back on the Elite Series grind. Welcome into the podcast. I'm Ronnie Moore, your host as usual. Kyle Jessie, my co-host like always. And Kyle, let's get going with the Northern Swing, the last three events of the 2023 Bassmaster Elite Series season. And we're going to kick it off with the AFTCO Bassmaster Elite at Lake St. Clair. Always a great time we go there. It seems like every time we go there as well, it's one little different. You know, you have the aspect of Canada, Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, all the rivers in between. There's a lot of different ways it can be won right out in front of Metro Park. There's a lot of different things, and I know that St. Clair is going to provide a flair for the dramatic like it always does, and we know that the weights are going to be probably extremely tight.
Yeah, I'm looking forward, to going out there. I've never actually been to St. Clair. I've drove past it a few times, but never actually been out there. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. Like you said, obviously we had Seth Feider on and we kind of talked about it a little bit. It's such a unique fishery. It's so unlike in certain ways than, any of the other, Great Lakes or traditional smallmouth fisheries that we go to, in the sense that the fish don't necessarily act the same. That's something obviously you guys will get into a lot on Bass Live. I remember sitting in studio for one of the events and learning so much about how those fish don't necessarily just relate to the bottom. A lot of times they're just feeding on bait and chasing around and almost more pelagic, like we talked about with Seth Feider. But it always ends up being interesting. Obviously, there's different baits at play. It seemed like, in my opinion, that tournament a few years back was kind of like, I wouldn't necessarily say when LiveScope was, introduced to the sport by any means, because I think that, it had certainly factored plenty before that. But that was one of those tournaments where it seemed like, the 2020 tournament where you either had it or you were in trouble if you didn't have it. Now that's not really so much of an issue. Everybody's going to have it to their advantage if they want it. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this one shakes out for sure.
Yeah, I think that our guest today as well is going to be Bassmaster Elite Series Pro Chad Pipkens, and he'll be able to, as a Michigan angler, not necessarily local to St. Clair, but just Lake St. Clair is one of the, if not the only main tournament destination that national tournaments come to in the state of Michigan, obviously of Saginaw. We've been to, Beta Knock and Escanaba up there in the upper part of the mitten. But Lake St. Clair gets the focus of a lot of Michigan anglers, whether they're pro or not. And St. Clair, we've been there quite a few times, just going back at least to like right before my era started in 2014. We had the end of the season 2013 event where Chris Lane took the title at the mouth of Lake Huron. And if you don't know how it plays out, Lake St. Clair is a big bowl to the north, and I mean, I guess it's directly north, but a little northeast, I guess, is the St. Clair River that goes to Lake Huron. And then from the south of St. Clair, you have the Detroit River that runs to Lake Erie. Obviously, guys in the past have made runs to Huron, to Erie. There's been times, Kyle, where you have to leave St. Clair to win the event, a pro level event. You had to leave St. Clair to do so. And then there's been times where you better be in St. Clair, because if you leave, you're going to get last. Like, you can't win. And most recently, the last few years, it's been that way. I think the last time we were there in 2020, only U.S. waters were in play and only St. Clair. So that is just a sliver of a playing field compared to what it actually could be. In 2019, when Seth Feider won the Angler of the Year Championship event there in the fall, later on, I believe it was in September. You were dumb if you left St. Clair, because it's been fishing so well. The weights have been huge. This time we're going out of a little bit different takeoff. I believe we're taking off out of Anchor Bay, which is just above the Metro Park region up there in New Baltimore, Michigan. Really accessible, honestly, very protected. For it being a big bowl, wind is definitely a concern. We've seen wind get bad there from the southeast. Southwest can hurt the Walpole side of it, but it's a lot of different aspects, and I'm excited to have Chad Pipkens on to break it down. I believe, like you mentioned before we started, he's fished 3 or 4, maybe 5 Bassmaster Elite Series events, plus he's won an Open there. And so he's well versed at fishing what he would consider one of his more home waters.
And yeah, Ronnie, let's bring him right on in. There's the man that we were just talking about, Chad Pipkens, the Michigan native himself. Chad, it's been a long break, seems like, but welcome to the podcast, and I'm sure you're anxious to get back going.
Yeah, you guys seem to do that to me anytime I get on a slight roll. It's like break time. Let's stop the momentum. End of the season, break time. Finish 33rd, 10th, break time. Let's take 6 weeks off. So appreciate that, guys. Yeah.
Well, we just wanted to get you, in the mindset. We didn't want you to have to go from the Sabine and all the tackle you were using there and just push you right into St. Clair. We wanted to let you have some time to have a break, get your smallmouth stuff in order, and now you can crush it for these last 3 events where brown fish are heavily involved. And we know that's always where you make a late season run, no matter where you are coming into the northern swing.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I need it too, because I dug a pretty hefty hole to start the season. The only time I didn't finish strong, I think, was when I started strong one year. So it's always a couple, 2 or 3 events that mess me up, but I've already got those out of my system. So we're good to go now.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about St. Clair. Obviously, that's the topic of conversation here. Maybe for people like even myself that don't have a ton of experience there just from watching the tournaments, kind of give us like a lead up to when we're going to be there, like kind of how the fish progress. Obviously, you don't have to get too into detail to give anything away, but just kind of
waypoints.
No, not at all. Just more or less like what, we can kind of expect as far as the stage that the fish might be in. And obviously, Ronnie and I were talking about this earlier. It's not so much of like necessarily always what the baits are, because a lot of the baits seem to be the same thing, for smallmouth fisheries, but just the stage the fish might be in.
Yeah, well, I would give you my waypoints out there, because the good news and the bad news is they change out. And that's one of the reasons why it's a fun place to take people, but it's not where I like to fish tournaments. The only trophy that I have from Bass that you can see is a champion trophy is on Lake St. Clair. But as you know, I ran to Lake Erie. That's what I like. But man, it's been fishing really good the last 3-4 years. That fish are healthy. Most of the spawn happens end of May, early June, and different section lake it takes off sooner and later. But they're going to be out there. They're going to start grouping up, and you probably saw that there was another trail out that just had a tournament there. The weights were really good. The big thing is the weather dictates what's going to happen, and I mean, those fish bite when it's calm and sunny. I think their strike zone is like 40 yards. I mean, it's ridiculous how far they will travel to eat a bait. But when they don't want to bite, you can put it on their nose. Now with the technology that we all have with the forward-facing sonar, I mean, you're going to watch them swim away from your bait, run away. And it's going to be one of those deals like on Lake St. Clair. If you're not a local, that's the place to go, because it's so hard, but it's so easy. And I say that because if you get in the right section, and I say section, it's a half mile or a mile square. And that's what it is. And those fish relocate, clean spots, clumps. Every day the bait moves, the perch move. And if you have that, couple football fields where the big ones are at, that's the deal. And it's funny because it's nothing like Florida fishing, but it actually is. And that's why I don't like it, because you have to find the area and you have to mill around. And it's great when you roll up and you just start catching them. But man, there is nothing worse than like having 4 to 5 pounders, which I've had before. And then you roll up and they're really not there. Like they just slid, 70, 80 yards. But if you don't, go the direction they went in, it can make it tough. And the last couple of times we fished there, I didn't have Mega Live, forward facing sonar. And I got smoked a couple times because that is one place it shines so heavily. And now we have that technology. So you get the best in the world out there when the conditions are right. You're able to hunt for those fish more. So you're going to see some really strong bags out of there, and Erie's fishing really well too. And I like that because I like to throw at rocks. Rocks don't move. And I've got 15 years of rocks, gravel, clean spots, boulders that I can bounce around and feel like, keep myself in the right place. The difference now is you're losing 2.5 to 3 hours of fishing. So the guys, if the big fish are on St. Clair and they get on those deals, it's I don't want to say hard to compete, but it definitely evens the playing field.
Well, I guess the one benefit of running away from, we were talking about this before we had you on, 13 with Chris Lane, it was one at the mouth of Huron. There was a bunch of people there. We remember how that went down. 15, Faircloth wins it. 17, Christie wins it, doing something different as well. Then we get to the Fighter and the fall, the full like September bite, feed up before, the bad weather comes a month later. And then you have Bill Weidler, I guess more to this time of year in that range of early summer, late spring, and it was one in a different part of the lake as well. For you, though, there have been years, and you've seen it, where if you leave St. Clair, you're guaranteed to lose. but then there have been years when you've made the run and you can leave St. Clair and compete. And you're saying right now that this is a time where you could leave St. Clair and compete. And I have a kind of a question on that is it helpful leaving your competitors? Because if you do roll into a mile stretch area, half mile stretch area, and there's 10 guys splitting up fish, even though they move and roam and they're not clumped up, that's a lot of pressure on an area. So going to somewhere that you may have it to yourself and you can kind of manage it, is that one big bonus of that?
Yeah, it's crazy though, because out here, it's I hate saying it, the pressure doesn't matter, because when you find that group, like I would be curious as to how many fish are down there, because it's honestly like there's bait fish magnets and everything within miles just swims there. Like it's ridiculous. And so this is one place I would say you're not getting away from pressure, but you're just getting to do what you like to do. And for me, like you can't always win there, but you can always do well. Anytime we've been able to run, I've won the one open. I've had like some top 10s and top, 15s or 20s and then 30s in the elites and whatnot. But I've done well there because I feel like I'm going to get my bites, but you might not be able to win there all the time. You know what I mean? And these last couple of years, like St. Clair's been great. And if you're around that group of fish, maybe you can't win if you find the mother load and 10 guys find it, but there's going to be 5 guys that find, if they find the same mother load, 5 guys will make the top 10 in the same section. You see that in old FLW tournaments. You see that in Bassmaster tournaments. There's just that of a population of fish. And I'm a big believer that like that group of fish is nomadic. Like when you find that mother load, it's not resident fish that are, rolling out to the, the mile roads or out, the Metro Flats area to live. Like they just look different. Like you're catching, 4.5 to 6 pounders and they're like big, beautiful shaped bluegill looking fish. And I don't think they live there all the time. I think they might roll up to, out to Erie, they roll up to the river and because there's places on Erie where, I get to go out and I'll catch fish and like they're resident fish. And there's other times where all of a sudden you're like, what are these, what are they're just beach balls. They look different. I just think they're swimming from Peely, they're swimming there. And there's been a lot of studies like they do move a lot like that. And those are the fish that are unpressured, I'd say. Maybe they were suspended out in Erie for a while and just eating and they roll up and they haven't seen a hook in, 2 years, so it's just like, and I think they're just swimming in. Like I fished a tournament with my wife out there, an open deal, like with some buddies, a payback series a few years ago. And we caught 25 pounds, finished second, but there was literally like 20 to 30 of us. And it was around this time because I left for ICAST after I practiced 2 days and I came back this Saturday. And that's when we fished. And there was like 30 of us that caught fish in like a half-mile square. And it was just, we rolled up and just caught them all day long. And everywhere you could see, people were just smashing. I mean, it was ridiculous. And they had been out there for like a month. That, I don't know how many fish have been taken from there, but they just keep showing up. So if guys get on that deal out there, it'll be harder for me to compete to win. But like if the weather's right and I can get to where I want to go, I feel like I've got a good chance to have a good tournament. And right now that's what I need. Bad. 3 of them.
You kind of mentioned it there. It's something that Ronnie and I chatted about briefly before you jumped on, was that tournament there in 2020. It seemed like wasn't necessarily like the introduction to live scope, because I mean it was kind of around forward facing sonar just as a general, but it seemed like that was the tournament where it just became like so evident to the guys that were using it, like you mentioned, had like kind of an upper hand really. And it's almost based on the way they described it, was like just based on the way those fish act. Like you said, they're not traditional, rock dwellers or sit in one place. Kind of explain to the viewer like what those fish do. They just roam around, or like, I mean, it just kind of seems like a unique behavior for a smallmouth, I guess.
It is. They roam a lot, but they do set up in certain areas. Like I still haven't figured, like there's areas like where I've gotten a key bite here or there. And if the fish get there, like I still get bites around that area. So there's something with the bottom, whether it's shells or a little bit of clean stuff in that grass, like that hold the fish. But it's like, where's that big population at? And that's the hard thing to figure out, because there's just miles of featureless bottom. And so before, like I love to pick up a crankbait and find them, because you do run into them like that. But now it's like you can do that, and then once you get a bite, you can literally hunt and pick them apart. And I remember, I wouldn't trade my 360 imaging for anything. Like I still use that more day to day than I do live. But there's places where live forward-facing sonar has to be the deal, and it's the perfect storm, as Lake St. Clair. It's flat. There's nothing that gets in the way. And they get up off the bottom a lot. I mean, you can just cruise and go like this, and they look like a giant, silhouette of something on the wall just sticking out. And you're like, I mean, sometimes they don't bite, But when they do, you literally are like, there's no way that's a bass. And you throw it over there and you watch them come up to get your bait. And if you're in the right area doing that, it's just ridiculous. Cause I remember before, like the tournament I did bad on I think it was the fall, or I don't remember which one it was. Cause I've had a couple St. Clair ones where I didn't do well. And it was because I stayed there and I didn't have forward facing sonar, and I was up against that. I've won a ton of money with 360 imaging when other guys didn't have that. And for the first time that, year and a half when we were left out a little bit, I felt it. Cause I mean, dude, it was frustrating. Like I had a little area where I caught 3 5-pounders in like 30 minutes. And it was, I don't know, at the time it seemed like, a couple 100 yards, but I couldn't relocate them. And I like looked and zigged, but I'm dragging a drop shot in the middle of trying to get one to bite, or throwing a crankbait when they weren't biting. Well, then I watch other guys buzz through and they're like, and you're literally like you're there without hands, handcuffed, like not able to even cast. And then now seeing it, it's ridiculous. I spent time before off limits messing around a little bit. And then last year I went out in July, and I went out for like 4 hours. I caught 39 fish, and I caught 38 of them visibly throwing to them on live. I caught one bass. And I mean, maybe I would have made some of those same casts if I was looking at 360, but at the time, like, it was that ridiculous. And I was so happy, but I was kind of pissed too. So I'm like,
Yeah.
dude, I almost made classic because of this, So it's not everywhere you need it, but like there it is the deal. You gotta have that live.
Well, and it makes sense because where live comes in key on places that have a lot of contours is for those fish that are just suspended out in the middle of nothing, and they're not on structure. Well, at St. Clair, it doesn't seem like there is much structure other than some grass that's sporadic here, or a half a foot drop there, or unless you're in the rivers and things. But can you explain, obviously you said late May, early June for most spawns. Obviously, if y'all have a snow in June, it's a delayed spring. If you have 90 degrees in June, it can heat it up quickly. Can you explain, let's just say the last week of June to the last week of July to the last week of August, what these fish do? Because down south, last week of June, they may be here. Last week of July, they're 10 feet deeper on another structure. Last week of August, they might be back to where they were in June. So what is for St. Clair? Do they just sit in the same spot for those 3 months and just get hit, or do they have to go and adjust where they go to this sand spot or that sand spot?
Yeah, they really do move a lot, and that's what's neat to see. Like, I'd be curious to tag some. I've always wondered about it. Like, if we could get a little deal where we got tagged and you got a little pin thing on your phone and you could watch a couple, dude, you could learn so much because they do move. And I would say mid-May, or even mid-April, they get up on the rockier that stuff and they hold. Like, I've been out there in middle of May. They're on the isolated clumpier rock on St. Clair. The mile road is just packed. There's 5 miles of boats out there, and there's fish everywhere. Like, all the fish that live in the whole lake and eat, they just go whoosh, and they suck to the bank. Now spawning here, it's you might have a half mile to a mile where they can spawn, because they'll spawn from 10, 12 foot up to the bank. So depending on water clarity, like, they're there and they're ready to go. But they sit up there, they eat. I mean, it's a really fun jerk bait, pre-spawn bite up there. And then they start to lock down where you're catching them drag and drop shots and Ned rigs around, and sight fish on single boulders and stuff and the gravel spots. And they get up there and they eat, while they're on the bed a little bit. And then they really start to move after that. And it depending on what stage the grass is in, really dictates as to where they go. Like, if all the bait and stuff is there and the perch are there and the alewife and whatever, they don't need to go far. Like, they won't keep going. Like, I've had one year where on the South Shore, it's very similar to mile roads, just a lot of rock and gravel up shallow. Like, they literally didn't leave, 10 to 12 foot, because everything they needed was there. The grass was right, and they just stayed there. I mean, you caught them in that depth the whole year. And so depending on what happens there, like, they might stay put. And outside of that, I think they go to get what they're looking for. They eat everything around, and then they'll roll out to that deeper stuff. Like, if you were to go out to those, the Canadian side, or even out in the Metro Flats area in that, 16 to 20 foot zone in April or May, you're not going to get a bite. Like, the life is not out there. It's cold. The fish are not out there yet. But as those fish start moving, there's a progression of, following them out. And the guys that guide, that regularly, like, those guys are good. I got a couple buddies that guide a lot out there that I don't get to talk with now because we're going there. But I mean, they, like, those groups of guys that follow those fish, I mean, they probably see it and know more about it than I do, because I'm not home a lot to go fish there.
Sure.
I fish there in the spring for fun. But when we get out there, like, we see where we get bites, but they see it as the bites start to get slower. Then they slide here and they slide there, and it's a neat place, man.
Kyle,
just
before
stuck
you
on.
jump, well, I was gonna ask before I forgot this was we talked to Seth Feider for the Pattern of the Month podcast for July about catching smallmouth and just in general. We briefly had him touch on St. Clair. He said there was no place that he fishes or that resembles St. Clair. You live in Michigan. There's a lot of lakes that may look like other lakes. Is there any place that you can fish that kind of resembles St. Clair other than Lake Okeechobee, where you're doing something different? So like, is there any kind of tendencies of those other lakes?
That's what I was going to literally relate it to. It's Okeechobee, total 100% different, but 100% the same. There's areas that, like Oneida has sections that fish like that. Cayuga has sections that fish like that. The largemouth in the grass, where it's kind of a flat bowl. Oneida has, flatter sections where the grass clumps up. There's sand where you're looking, but still, it's not like a whole lake is like that. You're fishing like, hey, this half-mile section, I know the grass is right, and they're in here somewhere. This is going to be the area where I just mill around versus like fish rocks or do whatever. So I feel like there's places like that, and it's dumb because it's also like fishing timber flats in a sense too. Like the fish roam around in that timber, like that largemouth. It just as our fish roam around on the flats and the grass. Like anywhere that's got that flat with some sort of vegetation, whether it be tree or rock, like it's kind of like that. And a lot of time you're waiting to run into the fish again. And that's what I like to fish more specific. That's why I have a hard time like putting my trolling motor down and not picking it up. But St. Clair fish is like that. If you put your trolling motor down in a couple areas, like Okeechobee, if you pick it up more than 2 or 3 times, you're going to get smoked. And St. Clair is really like that. And I've done that before where I feel like I can run here or there. And you get bites, you just don't get the right bites. Like the right bites are out there milling around. If you roll up to specific stuff, it just doesn't seem to happen a lot.
Ronnie, I was just gonna say I'm still stuck on this the tracker thing. I mean, I know deer hunters have like trail cams and things they have. Can you imagine just sitting there and be like, whoa, 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 Teddy's swimming. Hold on, let's see where he's going.
Well, like, that's what I loved that we did that. Well, Jerry McKinnon
did
it.
Yeah.
We did it for Bassmaster way long ago. ESPN didn't like the concert. It was like the conservation. Like, do we? So I think the story is, if I'm not going to get sued for saying this, I think James Overstreet would go to the event a week prior, catch a few bass in the weight category that they wanted, and he would have like one side of his live well with some kind of like chemical or a different kind of water, and then one side with regular water. He would put the fish in that until the fish fell asleep, cut them open, put the little tracker in there, sew them up, put them in the regular water. They would finally gain consciousness, and then he'd let them go, and they'd track them during the event. And I always thought it was funny when Jerry would come on there and give an update, and he'd say, well, we saw Billy the largemouth make a big move, and we realized that he was in the live well of one of our guys headed to another spot. So he got caught this week, or this one came and sat underneath the dock at Gunnersville and sat there all week long. It's pretty crazy, but I guarantee you, if we did it with smallmouth, they would travel, just crazy levels. And one reason why is because of their forage. So can you give our fans and viewers a little breakdown of it? We talk about a lot of smallmouth places and talk about goby, but there are actual bait fish, there's perch, there's crawfish, there's all kinds of things that other lakes have, and St. Clair kind of seems to have a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah, St. Clair has it all. I mean, that's the big forage. It just depends on the time of year. I mean, in the fall when the shad get in there, it's ridiculous in the mouth of the Detroit River and the Lake Erie, and even St. Clair. You've got regular shad, you've got the alewife that they feed on, like little bitty minnows, and then the perch is a huge deal. I mean, it's funny when you see these fish, and I fought them before, and it's a big one. Then you're like, what was that? And you start, and then it floats to the top, and they ate like an 8 or 9 inch perch. Like, it is ridiculous to see what a smallmouth will eat. And so you get around those, a lot of times the alewife drawing the perch and the perch drawing the smallmouth. That's obviously a big deal. And then there's a ton of gobies still. And then you've got, a lot of big crawfish population, sometimes some big mayfly hatches as well. So there's a lot going on out there. And it, like I said, the wind blows one way and there's nothing to hold that. They're like, that stuff is gone and you got to figure out where they went. And that's the hard part is, finding that bait each day. And you'll still catch fish, but you might catch 13 to 16 pounds versus 20 to 23. And it's like, it's hard to, knock out that low 20s every day if there's a lot changing or if it's rough and you can't find them.
Well, that was going to be my next question anyways, but you perfectly segued into it. The wind, obviously that's a huge factor, the weather in general. You might get 3 perfect days of practice where everything's the same, but like somewhere in the back of your head, you still have to plan for the worst case scenario or different scenarios as far as the wind is concerned. Just talk to us about how, you have to keep that in the back of your mind and kind of game plan for potential wind in case you get it.
Yeah, the wind out there is everything, especially if you're going to make, I hope to make a long run. And depending on what the wind forecast shows, like the extended forecast, the stuff I use is fairly accurate. I mean, if it's saying it's going to be, 0 to 5 or whatever, it's going to be pretty calm. If it's got that like 10 to 20 in all different directions, you need to be aware because it might change up. And things like that, you might just be changing, what you're fishing and how you're fishing it, like top, bottom, middle. But when you get the big winds, I mean, you might not be able to get where you want to go. And that's the main thing. Like the places other places we go throughout the year, you go fishing rough water, you get around, but there's places up here, like if it gets bad, you can't get there, you can't get back, you can sink your boat. So it's like, we've got good, great boats that we ride and stuff, but you still got to be careful out there. And, you want to fish smart. And so for me, before we get started, I would love to just fish Lake Erie. But depending on what's happening with wind direction and stuff, maybe there's certain areas I go or don't go, or some stuff on Lake St. Clair as well. So just trying to be smart, safe, and put about 20 to 23 in a day and take home a blue trophy.
Well, you're one of your buddies and I guess quote unquote roommates, or at least work together, cordial guys. Brandon Polinick, he's came so close to winning there in the past. You guys have probably talked about that. Has there been a win? Chris Lane, Jason Christie, Todd Faircloth, Bill Weidler, Seth Fighter. Has there been a win at St. Clair that has made you go like, I didn't expect it to get one that way? I have a few things that I'll pop in and ask questions about, but overall, just so I don't skew you, is there any that have you sat back and been like, that went a lot different than I thought it would?
No, man, that's it's a neat one to watch because it's cool to see like what guys catch and whatnot, but it's the same every time. I mean, I say that it's the same, but it's a little different, but it's literally like you find the group of fish, you win a tournament. Christie won, you got found an area by himself, whether you just catch him on a tube or a Carolina rig, it didn't matter. You could have caught him on a crankbait, a tube, and a Carolina rig. Wheeler was catching him on a drop shot. He could have thrown a Ned rig. He was throwing at fish that were there. Chris Lane found him in the mouth of the river. That's where the big group was then. Like, if you find the right drift, the right football field that they're in, you have a chance to win the tournament. And you see that with the guys. It's just, if you looked at like 20 to 25 fish that guys catch, look at the guys that are in the top 5. Their group of fish is different than the other guy's group of fish. That's the main thing. You got to find that group out there. And on Erie, like when I won, it was like that. Like it was a big group of giants on these 3 or 4 rock piles. But other times out there, like you're just catching a 2.5, 3 pounder, then you catch a 5. Erie is different because I feel like I can run and gun. Like if the mega school's there, I can smash them. But if it's not, I can still do what I need to do to have a good tournament. And I feel like you have a chance to win, but I feel like it's safer to have a good tournament for me as well.
So I have 2 things left, Kyle. I don't know. I don't want to interrupt, but I'm just going to kind of rattle some off. That Christie win, he caught a bunch of drum. Is that out of character that they mixed with the smallmouth so well there where he was just drifting aimlessly? Or is that a sign of certain types of forages there that the drum are going to be chilling around and the smallmouth don't mind it either?
It's totally situational. I've had times where like they're just mixed in, Lake Erie especially, totally mixed in. I haven't caught as many drum on Lake St. Clair, so I've never really seen that exactly, but it was probably because he was throwing it. If you throw a tube, you're going to catch drum. So I think it's again what he was throwing. He was in the right area. There was drum mixed in. You're throwing that bait they eat, you're going to catch a few more. I have had times, where I'm catching only smallmouth on Lake Erie, and then the giant drum roll in, and the smallmouth are literally either gone or they can't get to the bait in time. I've had that happen, within a 2-day span. Typically for me on Lake Erie, if I'm catching the smaller ones and one here or there, like the smaller drum, the bass stay mixed in. But I think there's like mega groups of those drum out there too. And when they get in, it's like it's hard to get a bait down to them, or they just scare the smallmouth off. But they do mix in unless they're the drum.
That's the school you're talking about for smallmouth, but just in the drum capacity. They're the big ones. Exactly. Is there a wind? Obviously, I can assume, but I don't want to. You're the pro. I want to ask you: is there a wind that you see and you're like, nah, I can't go to Erie. I'm not doing that. Is there like a level or like a direction that you're just like, I don't care what I found. There's just no shot I can do that.
Yeah, that east is tough because it builds from New York, whether it's east or southeast. It literally funnels between Point Pelee and Pelee Island, and it is a lot of water, and it can push 2 to 3 feet up onto the ramp, like at Erie Metro. Like you'll go there and the ramp will be submerged 3 feet, and then it starts blowing out of the west, and it'll suck out 3 feet. So it's pretty amazing to see the amount of power and water that moves in and out, and it's just like I've fished out there in 6 footers before and smashed them, but that's when we launched at Erie. You know, you get out there and then to Point Colchester there, and then you might be staring at 5, 6 footers, and you can catch them in those when the group's there. But man, it is miserable sometimes. And the big thing is, you know, you might only be able to go 8 to 10 miles an hour. So depending on how far down, like if you're trying to run to Pelee and you're trying to run there in 5 or 6 footers, you might have another, 20 miles, 15 miles, depending where you're going at 8 miles an hour, and you got the way back too, which could be nasty. So it's like at that point, you're just going to run out of time. And so that's definitely the worst wind that we could have. When I won, I fished in some heavy southwest wind, and there was still some sections. It took me 3 hours to get back, with getting gas the one time. But it only took me an hour and 30 minutes to catch what I needed to catch. So it's really that east wind would be a bummer to see if it was heavy. But outside of that, like if it's 10 to 15, it's fine. When you get up around that 20-mile-an-hour wind, the east thing would ruin it at 20 pretty good.
How similar are the runs we saw in an invitational event, I think a few years ago, Sandusky, and people ran to St. Clair and actually had a shot to win and were close to winning? That seems like a much farther run, just because I've launched in Sandusky covering opens before. That's a whole nother haul compared to just running into Erie. Would you say that the run from Anchor Bay, where we'll be kind of taking off from this time, to Erie is much more manageable than running from Sandusky into St. Clair?
It's really similar based upon where you're fishing. I mean, we're launching at Brandenburg Park now. I didn't know, like, it doesn't look big. It's 7 miles further than St. Clair Metro Beach.
Yeah.
And so when you take that 7 miles and add it to the bottom end down to Sandusky, you literally, if you're fishing Pelee Island from our tournament, that's the same run it might even be shorter to run from Sandusky out to the Canadian, like the South Shore area. The South Shore area. That's actually in like Bell River Hump. That's probably a shorter run from Sandusky to get to Pelee. So again, it's just what wind you're going to deal with. The tricky thing is you're literally dealing with two different systems. I've been on Erie fishing and it's blowing 20, and I'm like, dude, I need to give a bunch of time to get back. I'm kind of protected. And then I get back to St. Clair and I'm like, dude, it's glass, literally glass. And I was in 20-mile-an-hour wind. And so you want to pay attention to the wind maps. Like you'll see that on some of your charts.
Wind finder is your friend.
I mean, it's fairly accurate. I don't do no offense to weather.com, because I do watch that, some of their stuff, but dude, their wind forecast is brutal. So yeah, I don't.
Last thing, I said I had two more, and this is like number 4, but this is for sure the last thing, and we'll let you go. 65th in AOY after a great showing at Sabine. Like we said, we made you sit and wait and worry and think about it. 65th in points after Sabine, 70 points or so out of the Classic, which is right out of the Classic, meaning 40th. Obviously, that list can come down a little if Gussie double qualifies. We got some other things happen. The final winner at St. Lawrence double qualifies. It could go down to, maybe 44 at the most with the opens as well. 65th, 70 points out of 40th. What are your goals? Obviously, winning is the deal when y'all leave the ramp. You want to win, but are there certain goals that you need to accomplish at St. Clair to then take you into New York and keep you where you want to be?
Yeah.
Like, is there a number?
For sure. And I already surpassed that number at Sabine. So that was a big help. Otherwise, I need like 3 top threes.
Well, your number at the Sabine was like 96th. So you killed that number.
We're good. But yeah, I mean, you're a stat guy. I'm a math guy. So like I've been in this similar position in 93rd in the points before, 3 events out, but only 90 points back. And the break-even point is like 45 to 47. So any points you gain on that is what you gain. So I need to make up, 22 to 25 points per tournament. So if I'm finishing mid-20s, where the dust settles, I think I'd be fine if I did that 3 events in a row. It gets not tricky, but if you have a good tournament, I'm finished 45th, make some money. Well, I still lost 20 points, so I need to average around those top 25s to have a good shot. And I feel like the 3 places we're going are, 3 of my favorite places, but anything can happen out there with, long runs and smallmouth and wind and weather, a lot of variables. But, I had the rough start, but I like my chances where we're at now. So now we're going to have some fun and catch some big brown ones.
Chad Pipkens is the miracle man. He somehow pulls it out every single year to make the classic, has great northern swings.
Knock on wood.
Sorry.
Knock on your shelf, dude. This is your fault. Come on. Thank you.
There, I'll knock on all of it. We have faith in you, and you get a warm-up. We're shooting this podcast before you start practice and compete at the St. Lawrence River for the Open. So good luck there. I know that's a little smallmouth warm-up before you come back close to home for St. Clair. So, Kyle, I'm glad we got to have Chad Pipkens on today. And I know that as we get into the fantasy fishing section of it, I hope you're okay if we pick you, Chad. You're going to be in a great spot and around bucket D for us to pick. So we know you won't be in bucket D long when we get to New York. So we'll have to pick you when we can pick you.
Sounds like a good plan to me. We're going to get after and have some fun. So thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Kyle, it was great talking with Chad Pipkens for our preview of the next Bassmaster Elite Series event. Stop number 7, the AFTCO Bassmaster Elite at Lake St. Clair. And now I guess, I mean, the only logistical problem I'll say for some of these guys that are fishing that Open that's happening just a few days before practice starts at St. Clair over at the St. Lawrence River is the driving distance from Waddington, New York, making it all the way over towards Michigan on the north side of Detroit to then start practice. So obviously they don't have to swap out baits like the Sabine to St. Clair. You're going to be throwing similar things, but we both know as traveling tournament anglers over our lifespan that that's not a short drive. You just got done getting beaten up in the river, and now you got to go and get kind of mentally refocused for a brand new lake compared to some of the other people in the elite field who are just going to make their way up 2 or 3 days early and just hang out in Michigan. So do you think that that's going to have an impact on guys like Corey Johnston, Kenta Kimura? You think about Chad Pipkens, Jonathan Kelly, guys like that. Kyoya Fujita, I think, is in the field as well at the St. Lawrence River. Probably, I'd say, half a dozen to maybe 10 anglers in the elite field that are also fishing just a few days before in the Open in another state.
Yeah, I don't think the St. Lawrence River and Waddington, New York are close to anything on planet Earth other than Canada. I think that's about the only thing that it's close to. I think it could work both ways. I could see it going either way. I could see the guys that do well at Waddington, despite the fact that that's obviously, potentially if they make the last day, going to cut their, tournament, I guess their travel time down even that much more as far as turnaround time. But it's also a momentum thing. I mean, we've seen that work in the past, of course, have a good tournament and turn around and have another good one at the next event. Obviously saw that with Tyler Rivette in a big way early on in the season, and plenty of other examples with that. But yeah, I mean, the travel, it's certainly not ideal, regardless how happy you are about your finish at, the Open. Traveling that far, a day later is not exactly ideal, or even that night probably started back. So I think it will have an effect, but I could see it going positive or negative, to be honest with you.
Well, that is a perfect little warm up. We've had about a month and a half off the Elite Series and no tangible experience with smallmouth this year other than Jeff Gustafson. And I think Corey Johnston, Austin Felix caught a handful, Drew Benton caught a couple. And other than that, Jeff Gustafson is the only one who's actually targeted smallmouth this year. So it is a great warm up at the St. Lawrence River for the Bassmaster Open River exclusive just before the month off limits, before the elite event that'll be there in late August. So kudos to them. Day one, while we're shooting this podcast, obviously Chad Pipkens with his travel, we had to shoot his preview portion before he even got to the St. Lawrence River a week ahead of time. And then we're shooting our portion of this podcast while this event's going on. Corey Johnston, the day one leader there, over 26 pounds. You want to tell me things I totally expected for 1,000, Alex? And that's exactly what I would have said is Corey Johnston would be in the mix. So good for him. A couple other guys for the EQ race, and we'll get into that. In the next couple of weeks, we've got kind of a little bit of a break after this Open, late July. We don't have another Open until early to mid-September. So we'll have some winning ways and some other talk about the EQ points race as well. But let's do something we haven't had to do in quite a long time, Kyle, and that is get into some fantasy fishing. Set your fantasy lineups. If you don't know how to set your team, I'm about to re-explain it just so Kyle knows how to set his team since it has been so long. But if you go on to bassmasterfantasy.com, we got 2 different game modes that you can play for fantasy fishing. It's okay if you haven't played all season long. You can still win individual tournament awards for setting really great lineups for our smallmouth swings. So If you didn't get to do the first half of the season and you're a little late to the game, jump in for these last 3, get your feet wet, and then in 2024, jump in for the full rodeo. But bassmasterfantasy.com is where you go. Create an account for free. 2 different fantasy games. You have Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing, which is, as Kyle and I will go through in just a moment, breaks down through 5 different brackets, 5 different buckets, and they're situated based on Angler of the Year standings. So 100 anglers in the field, 20 per bucket, roughly. You have 20 for bucket A. That's the top 20 in Angler of the Year. The guys who are 21st to 40th, the guys still in the Classic. Bucket B, guys just out of the Classic in bucket C, guys with plenty of work to do in bucket D, and the bottom 20 of the Angler of the Year race in bucket E. The only thing that's real different is the first event of the season and the Classic, where we kind of change those brackets up differently. Those buckets, you get to pick 1 guy per bucket, and you kind of got to be situational there. You can pick some of the heavy names because you can use them in fantasy fishing going forward in other events, but when you switch over to the other game mode, Mercury Drain the Lake, that is a game mode where you got to pick your guy in his hot spot. You cannot mess that up because you only get to pick the angler once, and then once you pick him once, you lose him the rest of the year. So make sure when you pick a guy in Mercury Drain the Lake that you do pick him when he has a great finish. You get 8 anglers per team there. So 10 events, 8 anglers. You're going to use 80 of the 100 Elite Series anglers. So best of luck picking. You got to kind of know more of the field, got to save some guys for the northern swing, and I know we've saved plenty of guys. I'll have some shockers on guys that I'll use now instead of maybe for the New York swing. So Kyle, let's just we'll get into Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing first, which is our 5 buckets ranked based on Angler of the Year. Can you start us off and give us your bucket A pick, and actually give me your bucket A through E, and then I'll do the same thing and follow up with you.
Yeah. So, as you said, if you haven't set a roster all year, or in my case, if you haven't set a good roster all year, no problem, because you can change your luck here. I'll be honest, kind of the theme of my roster in Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing this week is a mixture of a couple high percentage guys and some low percentage guys. Being pretty behind in the standings, I'm going to take some calculated risk, try to figure out where I can make up some points. Obviously, I think in bucket A and a couple of the buckets, I think there's some lower percentage guys that could catch them and potentially catch them even better than the guys that are much higher rated. So starting in bucket A, I'm going to come at you with a pick you probably didn't expect unless you've already seen my team on my column on Bassmaster.com. Bucket A, I got the Arkansan Joey Cifuentes in bucket A. Joey Cifuentes, obviously being a rookie, a lot of guys that haven't paid attention to his career before coming to the Bassmaster Elite Series, before he made the move to fishing the Opens with the intent, obviously, of qualifying for the Elites, he got on a hot streak fishing for smallmouth, fishing, obviously, tour level events, you name them, St. Lawrence River, St. Clair had a top 10. All these places that the Elite Series are going, he's had success. So, whether or not it's this event or not, I guarantee you he's going to make a splash in one of, if not all 3 of the upcoming smallmouth events. With that said, I'm going with him in bucket A, currently at 2.4%. Obviously, there's some guys in bucket A, as there always is for every tournament, where they're going to be super high percentage, and for good reason. Obviously, you think about a guy like Brandon Polinick at 34%, Jay Shakurit for obviously good reason at 27.5%. But Joey Cifuentes, obviously, just this year has proved how good he is with forward-facing sonar, comfortable with the spinning rod in his hand, and has proven to be a good smallmouth fisherman in tour level events in the past. So bucket A got Joey Cifuentes. Bucket B, we're going from real low to real high as far as percentage goes. Bucket B, I'm going with Seth Biter. Obviously 30.6%. It's one of those things. Obviously, we had him for the pattern of the month just a couple weeks ago, and it's very evident talking to him. St. Clair smallmouth don't act like northern smallmouth traditionally. They obviously roam a lot. They group up, but it's not necessarily on a rock or a structure. It's kind of random. And I think that just having a general understanding of how the fishery works, obviously having a win there just 2019, I suppose, I think that goes a long way. So I got Seth Fighter in bucket B. Bucket C, somewhere in between as far as percentage goes, also has a win at St. Clair. I'm going with Jason Christie. I think more than anything, not just because he's had some success there. He's another one of those guys that's always been sneaky good with forward-facing sonar. Obviously, we think of Jason Christie as a shallow water power fisherman, which he's one of the best, absolutely, at doing that. But we've seen him on so many occasions be able to dial it in with forward-facing sonar, where obviously at St. Clair, I think more than maybe any other fishery in the country, unless you're dealing with like blueback herring fish, this lake, and you'll probably get into this, I'm sure, forward-facing sonar is a big deal. It seems like we can't have a podcast without talking about it to some extent. But St. Clair, it's going to be a big deal. It's really no way around it. And also, Jason Christie needs to catch him. I mean, I think a motivated Jason Christie is a dangerous Jason Christie. And to think that it's hard for me, and I'm sure you're the same way, it's hard for me to imagine a classic next year at Grand Lake that he's not fishing. He's going to find a way to do it. It's not like he's like so far back that he's, has no chance or anything. I mean, he's right there. But I think St. Clair is the perfect place to get him back on track, a place that he's had success, obviously a win in the past. And I actually a little surprised to see that he's only at 9.8%. Obviously, some big names also in that.
That's the reason why. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I mean, there's other guys. So bucket D, back down to a lower percentage for the same reason that Jason Christie, needs to catch him. I'm going with Justin Atkins. I got to talk to Atkins, of course, there at the Sabine River. We had a good finish, covered him on the water one of the days, and we were just chatting back and forth. And you could tell just the pure excitement that he has to go north and smallmouth fish. Another one of those guys that, it's funny. I was having a conversation with Stetson Blaylock at ICAST, and we were talking about how there's a list, and you could probably narrow it down to about 10 guys that are obvious smallmouth guys. They're guys that always do well with smallmouth, doesn't matter where it's at. They're smallmouth fishermen. But there's also a group of probably like 30 below those 10 that are equally as good, maybe not at notching top 10s, but consistently catching them in smallmouth fisheries. And I feel like Justin Atkins is one of those guys. You don't associate a whole lot of guys from northern Alabama, or really just anywhere in Alabama, as just being hammer smallmouth fishermen. But Justin Atkins, once again, like I said, needs to catch them to jump up there and have a chance at qualifying for the Classic. And like I said, I think just getting up there and just a pure excitement to go smallmouth fishing. Bucket E, I got a momentum pick. I'm going Alex Wetherill. So it's hard to have momentum when your top 10 came what seemed 100%. Like 6 months ago. But at the same point, obviously a guy from the Northeast, it's hard to gauge the experience level that he has on St. Clair. But just a smallmouth fisherman in general, a guy that understands smallmouth, hopefully we'll be able to go and dial it in and figure it out. But there's some names in bucket E that are really tempting. I mean, I think David Mullins is one of those guys. Alex Redwine. There are a handful of names that I'm really tempted. Jacob Fouts. There's a handful of guys, but at least for right now, I'm going Alex Wetherill and bucket E. So I'll round us out again. Bucket A, Joey Cifuentes. Bucket B, Seth Fighter. Bucket C, Jason Christie. Bucket D, Justin Atkins. And bucket E, Alex Wetherill.
I like that. And honestly, when you said I'm picking an Arkansan in bucket A, Joey was not the first Arkansan I thought in bucket A. It was Stetson Blaylock, because he is one of those sneaky Southern guys that always catches smallmouth. So I was like, it's funny you mentioned that later, but I was like, Stetson was one that I, volleyballed around in my head on if I should pick him or not. But I when you went low percentage in a bucket, I actually went high percentage in that given bucket, and then vice versa. I took some risks at other buckets, but I started off, and with Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing, I can pick this guy in future events as well. I'm not limited to just this tournament, so he may not be on my Drain the Lake, but he may be in my fantasy fishing lineup this week, just because I just have a feeling of how he's done, and now it's time for him to do well again. And in bucket A, he's already had a great season, 10th place in Angler of the Year. I'm going with Jay Shakurit. If people are like, well, you're just picking him because he won the St. Lawrence River last year. Well, for one, that's going to be why people really pick him in a couple events, is because he's the defending champ. St. Clair is much closer to his actual home in towards the Sturgeon Bay region and that kind of smallmouth fishing than the St. Lawrence River is. So he's probably got more tangible experience there than the St. Lawrence. It was the first week he'd ever been there, and he wins the event. So I think just in general, I think we also talk about this Lake St. Clair is a great forward-facing sonar lake, as Fighter and Pipkens have both said in this podcast and past podcasts. This might be the best forward-facing sonar lake in the country, at least with smallmouth in it, because they don't have a lot to relate to. They do roam. You can't just rely on your 2D squiggly spaghetti lines like you used to. Sometimes these fish move half a mile, and you need to be able to track them down instantaneously. So doing so, I think forward-facing sonar, I think Jay has locked that in and honed it in this year and honestly early in his career. Bucket B, there were some guys. Who did you pick? You picked Fighter. Fighter's at 30%. Chris Johnston's at 38%. I'm going with a guy lower percentage here just because he is one of those guys that's going to have good momentum. Day one at St. Lawrence River turned out great for him in the Open. He's been fishing fantastic in the Elite Series and in the Opens the last 2 seasons. I'm really expecting big things from him. He also did well at the Sabine River. This guy, it seems like anytime he launches his boat in America, at least, he catches them big time. I know he just spent some time over in Japan as well. I don't know how much fishing he got to do, but Kenta Kimura, Bucket B, man, he is quickly, he won an Open last year, but he has quickly jumped up my list for the guys who have never won an Elite Series event. Even though he's only in like year 3 of his Elite Series career, the dude has fished like 55 Bassmaster events in the last 3 years. Like he fishes, and he's gotten probably 45, cuts made or checks made in top half of the field, top quarter of the field for those fields in that time. So Kenta, I'm expecting big things from him. It's hard to say which smallmouth event he's going to show up big time in, but with the way he's fishing, I don't feel like his floor is too far or too low. Bucket C, I got to go with Corey Johnston, not only just because of the momentum he could have fishing close to home at St. Lawrence this week for the Open leading into this event, but just in general. We saw him get a top 10 in 2021, 2020. In 2020 there, he was in the top 10, and that was without Canada in play. One thing I think, Kyle, for some of these guys who we're expecting, like, hey, you got all these locals at the Coosa River. Which ones are going to struggle? Which one's going to succeed? We can say the same things for the smallmouth guys. There's 8 to 10 smallmouth guys. There's going to be 2 or 3 that might bomb, surprisingly, and then there's going to be guys that do exactly what we think. I just think the Johnstons know how to practice for smallmouth lakes. Like, I think that they scout well. It helps that they both work together as well. But I think that they just know when they see something they like, they don't have to pressure it, and they can find it elsewhere pretty quickly. So I'm going with Corey Johnston and Bucket C, big percentage, 47%, but I'm picking him there. I really didn't find anybody else that I was extremely comfortable with. I could go Cooper Gallant. I could go Jeff Gustafson. I kind of got a foot in the boat on each of those. I'm not fully committed on either one of those guys. And then you got a bunch of Southern largemouth guys. The one guy I did say, looking at him, that fishes down south that I could see doing well at this event is Brandon Lester. I think that he has dialed in his electronics very well. I think he's a very good finesse fisherman. He was one that I considered that doesn't have a past win there, and it's from the south. So keep an eye on those. But I got to go heavy percentage here with Corey Johnston until he shows me that he forgot how to smallmouth fish for a week. I'll pick him this week. We talked about it. Forward-facing sonar is going to be a topic. It's going to be something we're going to see really factor for these guys. Cody Huff is one of the best forward-facing sonar guys out there. He may not be one of the best smallmouth anglers out there, but I really expect him to show up big when it comes to forward-facing sonar and catching these fish. He did it at Oahe last year. I'd expect some of the same at St. Clair. He does a bunch of that types of fishing at Bull Shoals and Table Rock, not far from his home. Those are his stomping grounds. If there's any lakes in the south that would even resemble just wide open spaces sometimes and catching suspended fish, that would be the Ozarks region. So I'm really leaning on Cody Huff there. A lot of people are going to take Taku Ito. I don't blame him for that. He's in the 80s. He needs it in points big time. All these guys in Bucket D need it. Some of them are closer to the Classic than others, but they need it. Just like you said, Justin Atkins. Cody Huff is a guy. The last event was kind of a mess up for him. Not a mess up, but he just had a baby, came down and had 1 day of practice, and then he fished and had a great day, and then he had a terrible day. And so I was like, not sure even if he was going to compete in the event. He did. I expect he's going to smooth sailing into this one. No issues, no drama, no worries. Cody Huff's my pick. Bucket E, you mentioned this guy when you were making your pick. You didn't pick him, but you considered him. I'm going David Mullins in Bucket E. I think you could see him do well at 2 of the next 3 events, whether he continues his success at Champlain like he's had in the past, and maybe he does it at St. Clair as well, or it's St. Lawrence and Champlain. I really expect David Mullins to come in doing well in 2 of the next 3 to turn his season around for a brighter note. I really like him here because he is one of those East Tennessee suspended, even fishing for smallmouth, largemouth. He does do this stuff quite a bit at home, other than the big crankbaits, the big plugs, which could factor at this event. We always see it at St. Clair in the fall more, where big crankbaits play, but I'd expect Mullins to be apt at whatever technique he has to do to get him to bite. You've got guys like Alex Wetherell, Alex Redwine, smallmouth, young anglers that you can take a risk on. Larry Nixon, shoot, he's won an event at Lake St. Clair. Maybe he harnesses that. I know he's done well in the past recently as well there. You even have to look, a guy like Mark Frazier, it doesn't necessarily suit his style, but you can't keep a guy like Mark down all season long. I'd expect one of these, to kind of get up to bucket D, maybe bucket C tier by the end of the year for Mark Frazier. But that's my 5. Jay Shakira, Kenta Kimura, Corey Johnston, Cody Huff, and David Mullins. Kind of a mixture of some forward-facing sonar studs and then some smallmouth guys I can rely on, and then some guys who just are on some phenomenal momentum right now.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I think that when you get to this point of the year, there's so many factors, with, like you were mentioning, guys that need to catch them to jump up into the Classic range, to stay in the Elite Series. So many different things. Angler of the Year titles. Obviously it'll only amplify from here on out. The last 2 events will be even more so. But I feel like it was such a reset after the Sabine River, obviously going north now. I think that there's guys that are motivated for so many different reasons, and that sometimes can help you and sometimes they can hurt you. Obviously, you putting too much pressure on yourself and things like that. Not always a good thing. So, Ronnie, as long as you are all good, let's move to Mercury Bassmaster Drain the Lake. As Ronnie mentioned, or go ahead if you were gonna.
I was gonna say one thing. We just did one fantasy team. We don't want to overwhelm the fans with another fantasy team. Let's have the discussion before we move on about the winning weight for this event. So we kind of have a different situation here. We talked about it with Chad. 2020, we only had St. Clair in play and we only had U.S. waters. We had a small percentage of the playing field available to the elite pros. Then we go in 2019, it was in the fall, but we only had St. Clair available to the 50 anglers for the AOI championship. Then we go 2017, we had, I believe, I think we had all 3 lakes in play. I know we saw like maybe the mouth of Huron. I don't know if they couldn't go past a certain place in Huron or if it was just up there. But we saw that in play. And then in 2015, we had everything in play. There used to be times where when you leave St. Clair, you have to leave to win because the bigger fish were in Erie and Huron on structure. And then recently it had been all St. Clair. If you left St. Clair, you were losing the tournament, no doubt. Chad kind of mentioned we're in a little bit of an in-between where you can leave and be successful and you can stay and be successful. It's all about kind of where you find yourself, if you really found something special in the other places. So winning weight-wise, though, I think Faircloth won with like 84 and then like Weidler had 88 in 2020. I think Christie had 86 or something like that. It's kind of 2 pounds different, 3/4 of a pound different per day for the winners, but mid 80s to upper 80s. Where do we see? And then obviously Seth Feider had 77 pounds in the fall for 3 days. That's kind of an anomaly. He was on pace for 100 there. And then Chad Pipkens, when he won, I think in like 2013 or something in the Open, that was 3 days. That was only like mid 60s to win. So 20 plus a day for sure for 3-day events, 20 plus a day for 4-day events. Will we get as high as 90 pounds even? Will we beat the highest winning weight for an elite event there, or will we fall somewhere in between that 84 to 88 range? What say you?
I'm going to say somewhere in between. Obviously, I feel like I'm standard on being a Debbie Downer as far as the weights go. Here's what I think. I think that it's a mixture of two things. I think that guys have gotten so good at large with using forward-facing sonar. And once again, we can get in all that or this, that, and the other. But this is just a body of water where that is a huge benefit, is being good with your electronics. We saw that obviously in 2020. There was people outspoken about if you didn't have it, you knew that you were at a disadvantage for not having it because you felt it, you saw it as other guys were catching them. Another thing that Chad mentioned, when we talked to him, was the fact that guys are going to be fishing around each other. I think that for the most part, there's going to be a whole lot of guys that might find these megawads of fish, but they're going to have to share them. So that's why I think it's more unlikely that it'll get over 90. I think that somewhere in between over the course of 4 days. I mean, I think we'll see some really big bags. I mean, I don't think that anybody would argue that. But being consistent, I think will just be there's so many factors that go into it, with obviously guys fishing around your area, sharing a group of fish. You might find a megaload of them, but if 5 guys are splitting this megaload of fish, obviously your share of said fish are going to be less than maybe you hope. I think that the possibility of guys making long runs, and doing something a little bit different might change my opinion. If somebody is making a really long run and is able to do that for 4 days and find a group of fish that really differentiates, why can I not say that word, them from the rest of the pack, I think
sets them apart.
Yeah, we could certainly see over 90, but I don't know. I would say somewhere in between 80 and 90.
Yeah, and you have to expect if someone finds something off the beaten path by themselves that's just fantastic, one of those 4 days, the weather's going to be ill towards them if they're leaving and making a long run. And when it's ill towards them, they don't catch 26 to 28, they catch 22. And That's fine, but it sets their overall weight down a little bit. I've got 89.10. I'm saying let's freaking beat the highest winning weight that we've had at St. Clair. I look back, and every single elite that we've been there late August, the last week of August, almost 1 month later than we've been right now. Or we've been, like we said, AOI championship in September, different stage completely. Mark Zona had teased it that, hey, it went from snowing in Michigan to 90 degrees and it was hot, and it got these fish ahead of the game. Hopefully he'll chime in while he just texted me live on the podcast. I said, what's your winning weight thought for St. Clair? It's been 84, 86, 88 over the last 3 full field elites. And he says 83.5. So he's going a little under, maybe because of the pressure, maybe because we are earlier. I'm going to go optimistic. I'm just going to go a little heavier. I think that there's going to be, with Canada Open in play, I think that we'll be able to see some stuff we haven't seen in a long time. Okay, let's get into Mercury Drain the Lake. I can go first. Let me give you my first 4. We have 8 guys to choose from. Go ahead.
For what it's worth, I didn't get to say my weight, but I feel good about it now that Mark said that, because I'm at 85.8. So I'm somewhere right in between both of you. So I'm happy with my weight. To be honest, when I said it, I was so like, I don't know how to explain this, but like I was really unsure. I was like, I can look at all the previous weights, I can see the times of the year, all the things we discussed. And I was like, I just really don't know what to expect for weights, because there's like what I was saying, there's so many factors. I really wasn't confident in anything. So hearing your weights and his makes me feel good about my weight. Right?
I have no idea what I'm talking about because I don't live up there. Maybe Zona's a little under the weight mark because he is not a local, but he just maybe I see what happens every weekend here. I see how many boats are in the parking lot. Maybe it's just not going to do it as great. It's earlier in the year. These guys always shock and surprises. Mercury Drain the Lake, my first 4. Normally, I'll give you who I doubled up in on my teams, but I didn't double up on a single dude in my buckets or my fantasy team for Drain the Lake. So I'm just going to give you my first 4 off the board. Taku Ito, I'm not saving him for Smallmouth Disney World. I'm using him here. He needs it. Otherwise, his season could be going. It could be wrapped up. I mean, at this point, he may need a win in theory at the last event just to make the classic because he's in the 80s in points. So Taku Ito, Seth Fighter, Josh Douglas, and Chad Pipkens. And I really hated using Seth Fighter here instead of Champlain.
I was just about to ask that.
Man. I don't know what I was thinking. Remember, I set my lineup before the season even started.
Yeah.
I mean, he could go and pop off and do better at the St. Lawrence than both of those. Obviously, his track record at Champaign. Who knows?
Any of the next 3. Of the next 3. Who knows?
And so I'm gonna just go fearless with my smallmouth lineups, and I'm picking some guys in this week that you'll say I could save for Champlain, or I could save for the St. Lawrence, or that you would have used earlier in the year. So I'm just gonna stick with, be confident in my picks. So Taku Ito, Seth Fighter. I'm going with Josh Douglas. He had a really great event going here for the FLW Tour. Rest in peace. That deal. He had that. He kind of got the raw end of a deal, had the wrong fishing license, and he fished in Canada and had to throw back all his fish and got DQ'd. Would have made the Forcewood Cup, all this jazz, but he did well and had a really good bag the day that he got DQ'd after already putting some good bags on the scale. So Taku Ito, Seth Fighter, Josh Douglas, and I'm going Chad Pipkens just because he was a part of the podcast. There's a reason we had him as the guest analysis, I guess, angler appearance. And I really think he started something good at Sabine. He was really probably leaning on a good final 3 or a great final 3 events. I think the Sabine severely helped him. I mean, like it took so much pressure off his shoulders for these last 3 that he just got to do what he does best. So Chad Pipkens, my 4th pick out of 8 for my Mercury Drain the Lake team.
So we're definitely going to have some similar ones, it appears. I'm going to start from the bottom of my list, not in order, just in the way that they're actually sitting in the roster. But I have Greg DePalma, Jonathan Kelly, Kenta Kimura. Actually, ironically, you picked him for Rapala. I thought the same thing. Another guy that I don't want to get too much into it, but I think has figured out some things with forward-facing sonar that other guys have not. And I think that will help him. And Chad Pipkens. So my first 4, Greg DePalma, Jonathan Kelly, Kenta Kimura, and Chad Pipkens. And this is kind of a weird one. I got to the point, I don't set mine entirely before the season starts. I have a pretty good idea. I'd say like 4 to 5 guys I pretty well know that I'm going to use for each event. Just factoring in which event I think they have the best chance to win. But this one was weird because the last 2 events, I'm like so certain of who I'm going to save for each event that I was kind of a little scared to use some of those guys here. Similar to like your Seth Fighter pick. I was like, man, I really want to pick a guy like Seth. Really, there's a handful of those guys I'm saving for the St. Lawrence where it's like, you could justify them at St. Clair, but it's like, I'm just going to save them. So there's a few guys that, I'm pretty confident are going to do well, but like, theoretically, I've got guys that, may do better, but I'm just saving them for the last 2.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at my Champlain and St. Lawrence, you guys can't look at it, but I can. My teams don't suck there either. Like I got some guys there. And so I might be using some hammers here. It's kind of like you said, there's 10 bona fide smallmouth savants. I can't use all 10 at one event. And maybe it doesn't set up as a smallmouth savant for that given tournament. So I kind of got to use 3 to 4 at each stop. And you might not have a full-fledged number 1 team of the week, but I've got some lead dogs pulling my sled, in the Iditarod. I got some hammers in my group, and I fill them out with some decent guys as well that I can trust. So I feel you on that. My last 4, I've got a couple hammers that could definitely be used elsewhere. I'm going Alex Redwine. I'm going Brandon Polinick, Justin Atkins, and Paul Mueller. I have used 3 dudes with tangible St. Lawrence River experience, but it would be too chalk to put them there. And honestly, the fantasy fishing spirits that be know that I was going to plan and put them there. And so I'm just going to just swap it. They don't know that I just pulled a fast one on them, and I'm putting them at St. Clair where they're going to yield dividends there. So I'm putting Polinick in the game early. I need a good one this week. Alex Redwine, he's in the game. Justin Atkins and Paul Mueller, both those guys need a good start to their smallmouth swing if they ever want to be alive by the time they get to the last one.
Absolutely. To finish out my last 4, I have Alex Weatherell, Koyo Fujita, Josh Douglas, and Bob Downey. Bob Downey is one of those guys also that, you could justify probably putting
100%.
any of the last 3 or a handful of the events that we've already had. This is also kind of the time of the year where I get to the point where I'm like, you know what? How have I not used a handful of these guys already? Obviously, with the finishes that they've had, but super happy with Downey there. I want to say he had a top 20, maybe even a top 10 the last time we were here. So super happy with that. One more time, Alex Weatherall, Koyo Fujita, Josh Douglas, and Bob Downey to wrap up my final 4.
I like it. Sorry, I had an intruder that busted in the door and opened it. She was crawling down the hallway and pushed the door open. So, Marlo, can you say hey? Can you wave to Mr. Kyle and the Inside Bassmaster Podcast? Hey, she approves of your fantasy team. Okay, Kyle. So now hopefully she'll approve of mine. Thanks for joining us, sweetheart. Thanks, Mama. So that was impromptu. That's what we do when we're doing this thing, raw and real. So my final 8 overall: Taku Ito, Seth Fighter, Josh Douglas, Chad Pipkins, BP, Alex Redwine, Justin Atkins, and Paul Mueller. Man, if those pan out, and they've all had individual success at this place, but if they all put it together at the same time, I feel really good about that lineup overall. So, Kyle, anything else about Lake St. Clair? I'm grateful that Z jumped in and gave his thoughts on the winning weight. Pipkins being able to join us, what a great guest. A guy who keeps it real, whether he's doing well or not. But at the end of the year, most of the time, he has a heck of a streak to end the season. So maybe he'll keep it up close to home. I know his brother's going to have a big boat out there with a lot of fans watching. So if you see a 42-foot boat running around, just know that they're not a Yahoo, that they're a part of the Pipkins family. So just don't be mean to them. Okay, Kyle?
I can certainly do that. I can assure you, if I see a 42-foot boat out there, I won't be close enough for them to know that I'm being mean to them. So, yeah, man, I'm super excited to get back up there. When I say back up there, get the season back started, I guess. So, it's weird. It seemed like it was nonstop there between event number 1 and the Sabine River, and now we're getting back to it. It's been nice to have a little bit of a break, even though it's not really been a break. You know how that works. Obviously, we've had plenty of other tournaments in between. Definitely ready to get back to Elite Series competition. You could tell, being at ICAST, the guys are excited to get back to it. You could certainly feel the buzz, talking to all of our elite guys there. So I'm looking forward to it, and we'll see how it plays out.
Well, wrapping up the Inside Bassmaster Podcast presented by Black Rifle Coffee Company. Also, make sure you guys jump in and get in on their giveaway, their boat giveaway. Fully loaded bass cap boat they're giving away, plenty of coffee in the rod lockers, as well as fishing equipment and some cash to boot. Get over to their website to check out that giveaway before you run out of time and you don't get in on that offer. We'll also have that in the next episode of the podcast to give you some more details for one last sign up. Kyle, we're going to have Bassmaster Live, 4 days of it, Thursday through Sunday, the AFCO Bassmaster Lead at Lake St. Clair. Obviously, we know Thursday and Friday, Bassmaster.com exclusive, and then Saturday and Sunday on FS1, especially in the morning times. I think we've got extended coverage, a longer day of Bass Live on FS1 on Championship Sunday. Look forward to that one. I know you're going to have some great photos and content from the event. Appreciate you always knocking out the Tackle Tip Tuesday for me when I can't be there in person. And we'll knock out another tournament. We'll have 2 left to crown an Angler of the Year winner. We'll crown Rookie of the Year. And we'll crown a guy who punched his ticket to the Classic. We'll make all that official in just a couple events, but got to get through St. Clair before we get to the end of the Elite season.